All right, Doug. Today we want to talk about some of these politically incorrect words and the word police that are out there. They're part of the cancel culture movement, really trying to, of course, stymie dissent or disagreement or even open discussion about anything. And everyone knows about that. But the most insidious part of all this, I think, is the actual changing of the language that they're trying to do. And they're actually successfully doing, in fact. And I sent you, so one of our viewers sent me this travel article the other day, and I shared it with you. And I think this is a good example of starting with this article about what's actually going on in the world. And so this article, and I'll link to it in the description of the video, is from Fedor's, and the headline to it is 7 travel professionals weigh in on words to consider avoiding while talking or writing about travel. Sounds innocent enough, I guess. I think there are more interesting things to write about, whatever. But let me get into some of the words. The first one they say that you really got to be careful about talking about is the word cheap. They don't want you to use the word cheap when describing travel. I
Yeah.
think.
Let me start off. These are travel professionals, but these are like the living dead. These people are zombies. The travel industry has been totally destroyed
Yeah.
by all this COVID nonsense. It really has. The whole hospitality industry. So, kind of for what it's worth, uh, traveling was somewhat unusual. Most Americans didn't even have passports then. But now you go to St. Mark's Square in Venice and it's overloaded with tourists. So I guess I understand why Davos man would want to get rid of these hoi polloi so they don't obscure his view of things.
Mm.
He doesn't have to rub shoulders with them. I actually think that's part of it, but
Yeah,
who
I think that
knows?
is. I think that is a big part of it. And actually, let's talk about Davos man for a second. I think there's a better word for these people. I heard for him and others like him that I heard recently. Since they're messing with the language, I think we should mess with the language too a little bit. And it's referring to them instead of Davos man, which sounds kind of like suave and sophisticated, frankly. I think calling them bugmen instead, because they are the ones that want us to eat the bugs. Uh, yeah, like the bugman, and I think it does work. If I've seen it used a few different times by some people on Twitter, and I think it summarizes these people and their intentions pretty well. But let's get back to the words here. So cheap is the first one. They say that the problem is that it's not nuanced enough. For one thing, cheap is relative. So they feel like it's not descriptive enough, and it can be sort of mean to talk about things cheap.
Listen, my favorite places to travel have always been in the third world where it's cheap. And the reason it's cheap, incidentally, is because a lot of the people uh, only earn $1 a day or $2 a day or maybe $5 a day, something like that. Yeah, so of course it's cheap. Labor's cheap. Everything is cheap in those places. Maybe they don't like it. I don't know. Maybe they feel guilty about having money.
Yeah.
But nothing wrong with the word cheap, although you could say inexpensive depending on the circumstances. But I don't like to insult anybody that I'm talking to by saying that, right? But this is a question of being polite. You don't have to. What do we need? Lectures on morality? Is that different from being lectures
Well,
on manners?
but
I
and I
mean,
don't even think they're not even talking about politeness though necessarily, because it's not when talking to a local. They're talking about when you're writing about your, if you're traveling to Colombia and you're writing about eating at a restaurant or whatever, or street food. They don't want you to write saying that it was cheap. Like, who are you being? You're not being rude to anybody by
no,
using that particular word, which has a specific connotation in people's minds.
that's right. And the locals don't read these articles anyway. I mean, the
No.
locals are, frankly, just one stage above, or maybe not, grubbing for roots and berries. They're hardly reading articles in glossy travel magazines. So this is all crap. But go on to the next word that they zero in on.
Well, this is, of course, not surprising. Colonial. They don't want you using words like when you describe things as, a town as having a colonial charm, for instance.
Mhm.
It's like you're missing, all of the, the connotations of the word colonial. So that one should not
Yeah,
be, that
that's
should be
that's
excluded.
that's that's crazy too. I mean, frankly, these primitive parts of the world, that's not even a word that's a word that's so over the top. They
Yeah,
wouldn't even mention primitive.
no, you're not allowed to use that word. No.
Oh, that's completely beyond the pale. But actually, you probably can't say beyond the pale anymore because that has to do with ghettos, and nobody
Yeah.
wants to refer to those. So this is you can just waltz from one landmine to another. But and I wrote down a number of words here that nobody likes to talk about. They're not even landmines. It's more like a claymore mine that you can walk into, which is. But anyway, go ahead. What were we talking
Okay.
about just then?
Colonial, the word colonial.
Perfectly, perfectly good word. Yes, there have been colonies since ancient times, and you know what's wrong with it? I mean, I guess it refers to the fact that yeah, these people were conquered, and okay, so what? Listen, if you don't acknowledge reality, that's what words are for. Words are to describe reality. And this is why in 1984, which is being used as an instruction manual by these people, uh, Newspeak was what they called the English language. And the idea with Newspeak was to reduce the number of words in the language to only 500. And the reason for that is if you don't have a word for something, it becomes hard to think about it. And they didn't want people to think. So the fewer words you have, the dumber your thoughts are. You're approaching the level of animals that don't have a language at all. Except my dog knows sit and down and no. I mean, so they really want to. I mean, that's in the back of these people's minds. It's totally degrading and inhuman what they're doing with these words. But what's another one?
We want to avoid all three of these: conquer, discover, and explore.
Yeah. Well, discover and explore is what advanced people do when they're dealing with backward people, primitive people. And yes, there are people that are culturally backward and primitive. And actually, let me go on a very brief tangent here. This is part of the ongoing disintegration of Western civilization by saying that it's unworthy and to be hated. But in fact, Western civilization is the only civilization in world history that's worth anything. In fact, it's everything good, almost everything good that we have in the world has come from the West. And Ayn Rand once said, East minus West equals zero. Well, that's not really quite correct because there are good things that have come out of the Orient, which is incidentally another word since
It's awesome.
an intellectual named Edward Said said you're not supposed to use the word Orient. I don't know if that's on the list or not.
It isn't, but maybe a lot of people in my generation and younger do not understand actually the origination of that word and its opposite. Could you explain that to people?
Yeah, it used to be the Orient, the East, and the Occident, the West. Okay, fine. Those are just two different words for the same thing. But this guy Said, an intellectual, and I hate intellectuals, I've got to say. So he said we shouldn't use the word Orient because it has a connotation of the exotic and the mysterious and the backward and the degenerate. I mean, and actually, yeah, I guess it does because compared to the West with all of its virtues, yeah, the Orient is kind of that way. So, so it's the word you saying the Orient has been purged, just like the word. Nobody refers to Chinese anymore. You're supposed to say Asiatics. So instead of the hundreds of different ethnic groups in the Orient, you're supposed to class them all as Asiatics. Well, that's pretty stupid because the fact of the matter is most of them are Chinese. And here's another thing. You can go on and on about this. It was said before that a Chinese person could be called a Chinaman, just like a French person could be called a Frenchman. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not supposed to say Chinaman anymore. And I don't know why Chinaman is no longer okay, but Frenchman is still okay. Maybe that's going to be
Yeah.
purged too. I don't know. Maybe French human. Who knows what's going on in these people's minds? I think they're actually crazy. I mean, they're so psychologically aberrated that they're actually nuts. That's why I like to actually not associate with liberals, because I believe they have a screw loose in their head. And sometimes the screw is just limited to a certain part of the brain. And so you can't talk to them about those subjects. Otherwise, they can be normal and nice and everything like that. But the problem when somebody's got a screw loose in part of his brain, and these words we're talking about is a part of your brain, you don't know if that screw is going to bounce around and go to a different part of the brain. And, you don't know where this person will go crazy. So
Yeah.
I see the brain as kind of an integrated whole. And when people start accepting this, I know that they can go crazy at any way.
Yeah. And I agree. And I think the big thing about all of this language changing to me is back to the point you said before in 1984, is that it's designed to confuse the situation. It's designed to make things less specific and less mushy. And that became really clear to me in a conversation I had with Jane's aunt, who was in the Cultural Revolution in China as a little girl. And she told me that I have the conversation recorded, but she told me that the language was dumbed down to the point where a word could mean two different things. And so someone could come and say, you said X, and you did in fact say X, but X in the way you said it meant Y. But you actually did commit the offense of saying the wrong word, but that wrong word was the only word they had to describe both things, And so she said it was impossible to talk without risk of getting in trouble. And I think
that makes society even more Kafka-esque, where you can be accused of anything. And yeah, exactly. This is what politics does to everything, but this is actually worse than politics. They're dealing with the way people think. Well, of course, Orwell, of course, had thought crime. That was one of the concepts that was in the book. So,
so the next word on here is exotic, which we mentioned that word before. You mentioned it in describing the Orient, but they say here that it's often used to describe a person, place, or thing that is perceived as foreign in comparison to what is considered the, quote, dominant or main culture, which is often white American people and culture.
Yeah, well, that's right. Because all of the culture that we have in Western Europe and the US is white mainstream culture. And if the exotic people or the primitive people or the invading barbarians don't like it, okay, then don't adopt it. Stick with your own culture, quite frankly. And going back to what I said earlier, that about East minus West being zero, yeah, there's some very good things that came out of China, for instance. I like the cuisine. The cuisine is excellent. I mean, it's fantastic Chinese cooking. Okay. I like Oriental martial arts. That's a contribution. Very good. I'm a big fan personally of Taoism, somewhat lesser of Buddhism, but okay, these things. Yoga came out of India.
Yep.
Not sure what else has come out of India. Well, numbers, I guess. Yeah, so there are things that have come out of, not totally without, there are some cultures that have contributed absolutely nothing to the general culture of humanity. Absolutely nothing. I mean, most of the world around the equator, quite frankly, has brought nothing to the party at all, frankly. And they're the ones that are whining and complaining the most. So,
and they're the ones referred to as exotic.
Exotic, exactly. Well, they're not exotic. They're actually, they're primitive. Exotic is a nice word.
It's true. It's a nice word for primitive. Yeah.
It's it's just crazy. And of course, um, if you're exotic, it also means that you're a native, as in the natives might be restless. Or the natives are getting restless, or you know, and or the indigenes, which is another word that the colonialists like to use. Well, they're the locals. What are you supposed to call them? They live here. I mean,
Yeah.
we're the foreign invaders. We're the conquerors. I don't, incidentally, I'm not a fan of conquest or invasion. Au contraire. I mean, you can trade with the locals or the natives or whatever. Don't believe in conquering them. So, on the other hand, you can say, as I've said a number of times, I haven't been canceled for it yet. It's that when Da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope around, when did he do that? I don't know, 1480 or something like that. If he just thrown a wheel out onto the African continent, the natives should have been eternally grateful, except he would have also had to have thrown out an instruction book on how to use it, except they couldn't read either. So colonialism and the invasion and conquest of Africa by Europe, I totally disapprove of that method. Better that you trade with people on a peaceful and voluntary basis. But you can't talk to these. First of all, you can't have any humor in dealing with the subject, and you can't talk to the politically correct or the wokesters about any of this. They absolutely have a psychotic break when you even talk about this stuff. Well,
Right.
it's not a psychotic break. They're actually crazy.
Yeah, and I think it's like they almost, if you use a word to describe an activity, it basically as though you're endorsing the activity. Like it's like if something that implies slavery, for instance, be like, oh, so you think that's okay? No, there's nothing. When I'm talking about that, but it's like it's almost like the use of the language is as bad as the deed in their minds. And it's like, and like, how can you begin to even engage with somebody when the use of words is as bad as actual acts of evil, actual, like, as, murder or whatever, or like immoral acts? Like, it doesn't make sense. It's just, obviously use of language isn't, but this is what they move things toward. And I was wondering, when you're talking and saying, you're talking about Western culture and you said white. Now, the whole thing is with that is, when did it become white also? Because certainly there was for a long period of American history, the Italians and the Irish did not consider themselves the same. They would not
No,
say we're
absolutely not.
white.
I mean, there are signs that were in stores and bars and everywhere. It says, no entrance to dogs and Irish.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So how does this happen though? Did we already miss the first pass of political correctness in language that maybe already assimilated or pushed out all of those, white ethnicities and then lumped us all into one group?
yeah, well, we're still not quite that way, because to this day, I have friends who are Irish, and they don't want to associate with non-Irishmen. They
Yeah.
really don't. I mean, just like Italians, a lot of Italians, especially with, let's say, mob connections and grew up around they don't want to associate with outsiders. And of course, but they're generally integrated into society. I mean, but I'll tell you what's really interesting this way is talking about a group that has integrated and not integrated. It's kind of interesting, is the Jews.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to talk about the Jews to start with. In fact, I became aware, a friend of mine who was kind of the grandfather of the newsletter business, Richard Russell, and we were talking about this one time, And he was a Jew. And he said that, and I don't know, Dick died 10 or 15 years ago. He was a World War II veteran. He was a bombardier on a B-25,
Wow,
like
that's
Syria and Catch-22, actually.
Wow.
And he said, you know, you can't use the term Jew anymore. You got to say Jewish people. And that's interesting. And maybe it's because the Nazis always referred to them not as Jewish people, but as Jews. And so it's kind of seen as a pejorative. That's what Dick said anyway. That was what he was noticing himself. And I thought about it. I said, you know, that's true. You don't really refer to somebody as a Jew. It's a Jewish person generally. I mean, it's considered more polite.
More polite. Yeah.
Yeah, and more correct. And so why this limerick, how odd of God to choose the Jews. So why do so many people, and I don't see, incidentally, I do not see widespread anti-Semitism anywhere. I don't. I mean, I just don't. However, that said, I mean, some of my best friends are Jews, which you're not supposed to say.
You're not supposed to say. Well, they're Jewish people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're not supposed to say when you're talking about some group that is a.
I have a black father, right? That's what's talking about your Jew resume, your black resume.
I know nobody can one up that.
Yeah,
it's very funny, but oh God, what was?
Oh, you're saying you're not supposed to even talk about them.
About Jews, yeah. I mean, I actually consider myself to be a kind of an honorary member of the tribe, frankly, because I have so many Jewish friends and associates, because I've been in and around the financial business and spent a lot of time in big cities where Jews tend to congregate. It's just a fact. They're not a rural people these days. So I consider myself in fact, every Friday I get together with about a dozen or 20 rich Jews. In fact, I may be the only non-Jew, or there's another guy I think that is too. And nobody's really sure whether we're Jews or not, quite frankly, because my name isn't Jewish. Maybe I changed the name to Casey from, something which happens. But the fact is that birds of a feather, talk about racism now. This is a lot of this is racism, which is one of the big things in society today, supposedly. Everything is racist. So what about racism? Well, I don't approve of racism insofar as it's stupid on the one hand, but on the other hand, when I'm looking at dogs and I say, well, that Rottweiler has different characteristics than this Pekingese, and that poodle's got different characteristics from this pit bull. They've been bred that way over thousands of years. So is one better or worse? Well, it depends on the circumstances where they're going to be. And anyway, I'm not talking about good or bad or useful or not useful. I'm just talking about in the 300,000, roughly, nobody knows for sure, but that's a rough number, years that modern, or I should say biologically modern people have existed. We've differentiated ourselves into many different groups, races, if you would. And historically, when life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, which is to say 99% of that 300,000 years, if there was a deer over there and there was somebody else that wasn't part of your clan or your tribe, but was obviously other, different, you could tell, hey, he's got a different shaped face, a different color, different everything. Almost certainly he was an enemy and a competitor, and he's not going to. So yeah, it's like bred into us that we're birds of a feather flock together. That's what happens. So Is that good? Well, I don't know, good, bad. I like to view people strictly as individuals, strictly
Yes.
as individuals. But on the other hand, if they're part of a group, either as an accident of birth or because they've self-identified or segregated themselves into a group, well, an intelligent person takes in all the knowledge that he can gather about a new person as to what am I dealing with? Who is he? Friend, foe, uh, good guy, bad guy? You look at all these things. So in today's world, yes, if somebody is Black or Chinese or an Australian Aborigine, that's another word that's probably going to join the ranks of the departed too, is Aborigine or Aboriginal. Seems that way. Okay, I don't know. I mean, he's certainly exotic to me. Maybe primitive. Chinese not to me primitive. The Aboriginal is probably primitive. I mean, this is you gotta assess these things in a rational, reasonable way. And the guy could become my best friend or my worst enemy, but it's got nothing to do with, unless he identifies with, a racist is somebody that race is what he identifies with. It's the biggest thing in his life. Like most of the race baiters that are Blacks, they're horrible racists because the big thing in their life is being Black. That's what they identify as. Okay, well, entirely apart from the fact, I see people try to, as much as possible, as individuals, not as members of races. Being white is not the center of my life. In fact, something I don't even think about. Anyway, this is a complex subject that's
It is really complex. Let me say one more thing about racism since we're on the topic, because I know you always like to define terms.
Yeah.
And recently, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which was founded to fight anti-Semitism, changed its official definition of racism. So the current definition, as defined by the ADL, is, quote, the marginalization and or oppression of a people of color based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people.
These people are actually crazy. First of all, they're probably unaware, or it seems like they're unaware, that only like 10% of the world's population right now is white, which is to say of European derivation. And of course, if the culture melds somewhat, I mean, people from northern India and Iran, they're really white too. But I don't know, do you perceive them? I don't even know. We don't capitalize the word white, but now, certain elements of the Black community have decided you got to capitalize the word Black. And everywhere I see Black referring to a racial group, but Black, it's capitalized, but white isn't capitalized.
Yeah, well, here's the other thing, Doug. Is like this is on the ADL. This is on the ADL website, and so basically there are two classes of people here. There's the people of color who are marginalized or oppressed, and there are the white people. Which one of those are the Jews in?
That's a good question.
I mean, the Jewish people. Which are the Jewish people in?
Yeah. I would definitely class them as white because they're Indo-Europeans, frankly. I mean, so of course they're white, yeah. But, it gets back to this cultural thing with the Jews again. It's that the Jews have self-isolated for a couple thousand years. And the Jews wonder sometimes, first of all, anti-Semitism is so small and marginal. I don't see it as being really an element, but maybe I just don't hang out with the class of people that do. However, let's look at it this way. The Jews have always, when you're meeting a different group, it's considered polite to partake of their food. But if you have dietary restrictions where you have your own particular food and you consider their food unclean, well, it makes the other person feel like, what's wrong with this person? I mean, why do they set them, why they think they're better than I am, that they won't eat pork, or they won't eat, a milkshake with a hamburger, which is breaking another, strict Jewish
Yeah.
dietary law. And well, it started out in the days of, well, certainly back in the days of Rome, where everybody would acknowledge everybody else's God, worship everybody else's God, and adopt that God that came from this country. And you could build a temple to it and, worship him along with your own gods, Jupiter and Mercury and all the rest of them. But, the Jews, had only their God and considered everybody else, when you set yourself aside, and then when you only tend to deal with other people, then the people at large tend to punish you for that. So,
Yeah.
and it still happens today. I mean, look, Mormons are the same way. Mormons are very much the same way, that way. Of course, on the other hand, Mormons are called Mormons, and technically they don't like to be called Mormons.
No, they don't. They do not. They consider Mormon calling derogatory. They want you to call them LDS or Latter Day Saints.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Well, look.
So I do. I call them that when I talk to them.
Here we are in Uruguay, where we're technically gringos, which was a word that originated during the Mexican-American War, I understand. We're not sure exactly how it came up, but split all through Latin America, where the North Americanos are gringos. Doesn't bother me. I mean, I refer to myself as a gringo, but look, all these groups and races and God knows what that see themselves as a group have names for other groups, but it's only the white people today that are discriminated against. And like I said, we're only 10% of the world's population and dropping radically. Radically.
Huh.
I mean, maybe they'll just keep white people around in the future as, a subgroup of actors or something like that. Or,
Well, and nice to have scapegoats available. Also, it's always nice to have some
yeah.
scapegoats.
So helpful.
But here's I just want, before we move on to these other words that are in this article, I just want to say, like, maybe I'm misinterpreting what the ADL was about, but I just find it odd that the ADL, which I thought was to defend Jewish rights, like it was I thought that's what it came from.
Yeah,
right?
I thought so too.
Okay, so they're on their website, they are saying that racism is the marginalization or oppression of people of color, only people of color, based on socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. I assume the Jewish people were white people. I think I saw something where Whoopi Goldberg got in trouble because she called Jewish people white people also. So I think that, but
Well,
so
there used to be a term, maybe there still is, something called a self-hating Jew. And this is a Jew that is not a Zionist. Well, a couple of friends of mine, you know Walter Block and Alan Butterman, right?
yes, of course.
Well, they wrote a book called that's just been published, and we'll have to have those guys on, because when it comes to talking about Judaism and Jewish culture, they know as much about it as anybody. So they published a book about Zionism, a defense of Zionism, okay?
Yeah, it was like the libertarian case for Zionism or something like that, right?
Yeah, I forget the exact title of the book, but that's what it boils down to. And of course, the Palestinians and the Arabs and all that say, no, we don't hate Jews. Well, they may or may not hate Jews, I don't know, but they say, we don't like Zionist Jews, okay? So this is, the problem, of course, is that everybody self-identifies as a member of some stupid group and puts everybody else in a pigeonhole, which, as I said before, can make sense from some points of view and some circumstances. Oh, listen, this reminds me, there was a term that the British used referring to the Indians that they just conquered, where the the management of the Raj was saying, the British soldiers were calling the Indians all kinds of terrible pejorative terms about the people they just conquered. Okay, basically they despised them, and so management in the Raj came down and says, you shall not refer to these worthy Oriental gentlemen by, there was a list of pejorative names. So what, of course, did the British soldiers do? Worthy Oriental gentlemen, Wog. So they called them Wogs. And so it doesn't matter what you do. It's still there. I don't know if
Exactly.
Wogs, I don't know if you still, if the word Wog is still used as a pejorative
No,
any place or not.
I've never heard that before. No.
Oh, well, it used to be a way of trying to think of some nasty term they used for Indians. But here's something kind of interesting too. It's that the Chinese have never been subject to this quite so much as the Indians have, because the Chinese basically despise other races. I mean, they're a very racist race. The Chinese consider themselves better and superior to all the races. Well, and they have an argument for that in that tests that have been taken show that the average Chinese IQ is like 105, as opposed to the average white IQ, which is 100, as opposed to the average sub-Saharan IQ, which is, sadly, they say about 70.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know. I'm just telling you what
Yeah.
what people say.
Yeah,
But
and I think that the biggest thing about these words is they're actually what they're trying to remove from all this is our ability to describe and communicate what is objective in the world. So
yeah,
that's what they're trying to confuse that. Now I understand not being rude to others, and you should be polite to people and treat people with respect. But it's important to have language as a tool set, and the more if all you leave in your toolbox is a hammer, you only give a couple words, it's going to be a very confusing world for everybody. So a couple more words in this article. It says, avoid using the words impoverished, underprivileged, and poor.
what are you supposed to say? They have
Underprivileged is the politically correct word to describe poor, right?
yeah, but
Underprivileged.
that's not good. That's not good enough anymore. It's kind of like it used to be. You called somebody that was living on the street and begging. He used to be called a bum. This was the common word, a bum. And then that became incorrect. So you had to call him a homeless person. But now that's kind of incorrect too. So it's supposed to be an unhoused person.
Yeah, in Denver they were calling them campers.
Campers, right.
Campers. They were camping. It's so crazy. But it just confuses it. It confuses it because I mean they don't. What's like? Who are we talking about? Are we talking about the
Nobody knows
people?
what they're talking about anymore.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
why it is so critical to define words, because if you can't define a word you use precisely and exactly, then actually you don't know what you're talking about. And somebody else defines it in a different way or doesn't understand it, maybe, and that's how arguments start. I see this on television all the time where these people actually don't know what they're talking about because they don't define the words that they use.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's part of the ongoing degradation of civilization, I'm afraid. I suspect this type of thing happened a lot less during the 19th century when people were classically educated and precision was considered an important thing, and no more. But this is such a broad subject. Here's another one that kind of annoys me. If you look at things that were written before, I'd say 1950, I'm guessing, when they're referring to people in the Islamic world, as we call it today, they were referred to as Muhammadans, okay? Now that is considered very impolite today because the Islamic people don't view themselves as Mohammedans. Now, this is kind of interesting insofar as followers of Christ are known as Christians, followers of the Buddha are known as Buddhists, followers of Zoroaster, there are still a few of them around, several 100,000, mostly in Iran, are known as Zoroastrianisms, followers of Confucius as Confucians. But why can't you refer to Islamic people as Mohammedans? Well, they have a reason for that. Well, Muhammad was just a prophet, not a god. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. I think people have a right to refer to themselves any way they want, give themselves whatever kind of name they want. That's fine, change your name, whatever. But they want to impose their word on everybody else. Now, why is that a problem? It's because Islam means peace, or the house of peace. And it's giving themselves a really, it's elevating themselves. And by forcing us to use their word, I mean, we're playing on their semantic and psychological and spiritual battlefield.
Yeah.
So
smart on their part. It's actually very
it
smart.
is smart. It's very smart. That's what all this is about. They're trying to get other people, everybody is trying to get other people to play on their psychological battlefield. So, I mean, I'm happy to refer to them as Islamists or Islam or whatever, but I'll just as often refer to them as Mohammedans, which is how everybody in the West used to refer to them up until, I would say it seems about the 50s, but you have to do a search and see how this all changed. And so that's a big one, because of course, Islam is, and Muslims, which is a version of Islam, depending on how you pronounce these things. But I like to say Mohammedan just because it draws people attention to that, and I can have an interesting conversation with
it's got good shock value.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of shock value, not because I like to be impolite. I don't. I don't like to look for conflict with people. But on the other hand, when I feel like it, if I'm of a certain humor, I feel that if I'm dealing with a donkey, for sure, often the best way to get its attention is to hit it between the eyes with a 2x4. And then it'll pay attention.
Yeah.
Instead of things just kind of skating over the top of it. So
Exactly.
I don't like that, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes it's important to, in fact, one definition of a gentleman is one who never offends unintentionally. That's a gentleman. You don't offend people unintentionally. On the other hand, sometimes over some things, I think it's important and righteous to offend people quite intentionally.
Well, and gentlemen, that phrase, from what I understand, is also a phrase that has been a victim of this word policing from way back. It used to refer to noble people, the landed gentry, essentially. They were gentlemen. They were specifically people that had a certain social stratus in the population, described them very specifically, talking about the gentleman that way. And then, then the idea is, well, but they aren't behaving like a gentleman. So should we call them a gentleman when they're not behaving like a gentleman? Instead, here's this, other person, this merchant, who is behaving more gentle, like what we'd imagine a gentleman would behave like. So we should start using that term and change it to mean the behavior rather than the description of that word specifically, and what it actually meant. So the changing of these, so it's okay for someone to be like being a word that describes what someone is useful, and like you could say that's a bad gentleman, you know what I mean? But it'd still be a unsavory landed gentry person. It describes exactly who they are, and not have to change it and dilute the language. So then theoretically everyone's a gentleman or no one's a gentleman. You know what I mean? And like it becomes it becomes a very vague term over time as you sort of muddy it down. So,
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I guess I agree with what you say, but I've always had kind of mixed feelings about gentlemen because, like, when the British colonialists came to North America, many of them were described as gentlemen, which is to say they had no skills, and most of them
yes.
starved to death, quite frankly.
Well, exactly, but that's because, but what they were is they were landed gentry. They were
Yeah,
useless they were not the people that should have been sent to
no,
Jamestown to start a
yeah,
colony. But it did describe what they actually were. The language was the correct language to describe them and what they were,
yeah,
landed gentry.
yeah. In other words, they were who they were strictly through an accident of birth. And
Right.
yeah, well, and of course, talking about accidents of birth, now we can get into disabled people and people that are born as dwarves and midgets.
Wait.
I understand, I, I think midget has become a non-word.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
understand
that's
also, though, that from a medical point of view, a midget is different from a dwarf. Did you know that?
yes, that's true. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but you're not ever supposed to say midget. In fact, you're not even supposed to say dwarf, are you? It's supposed to
No,
be little
it's
people.
a little person.
Did you hear about this? Who is who's the actor that played that dwarf in Game of
Game of
Thrones?
Thrones. Yeah, yeah.
So there was this news item the other day where he said, since Disney is remaking Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, I don't know if they're going to call it that or not. But first of all, they're casting a swarthy skinned
A
person,
Latina as
a
Snow White.
Latina, very good looking Latina, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
beautiful. Hmm.
But wait a minute, it's inappropriate because they didn't have Latinas in Northern Europe where this thing was being written. So it's a Northern European fairy tale to start with.
Yeah.
And so I think his main beef was, aren't they using normal sized people for the dwarves now or
No,
something?
no, no. What it was actually, his argument was that they were being progressive and not casting a white woman in Snow White's role, but instead casting a Latina person in that role, and that's progressive and good. Like we got to expunge the white people from these things.
I see.
But we were not. We were being very ableist still, meaning that why are we casting little persons as dwarfs? Like why are we doing that? Why can't the dwarfs be normal people? Like full size
Because
people.
dwarves are little people, which is their preferred term anyway, isn't it?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, yeah, but he's just saying they shouldn't. He was saying that they should not cast dwarves as dwarves. Instead, they should cast normal sized people as the dwarfs.
This guy is actually, I don't know if he's stupid or crazy or maybe just evil because, hey, what about the dwarves that would like to be actors and would love
Yes,
to haul down the big money you'd get for being one of the seven dwarves? I mean,
exactly.
he's like a self-hating dwarf is what he must be.
maybe, maybe, but he's also the highest paid. He's got the monopoly on dwarf roles,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
so
All for me. I'm the only dwarf in the world that can capitalize on that. That's
exactly. Maybe that's
God,
it. I don't know.
I hate these people. I hate almost
Yeah.
everybody in Hollywood, except for who are the only Hollywood actors I like? Uh, Kurt
Clint
Russell,
Eastwood, Kurt Russell.
Clint
Yep.
Eastwood,
Yep.
Charlie Bronson, who's dead,
Yeah.
but he was great.
People that are
Love
alive. Let's
John
keep
Wayne, although John
that.
Wayne was a little bit too reflexively right wing, but
Yeah, but
certainly Charlie
who's the
Bronson.
who that's still alive though? Who that's still alive? I think that's the bigger ones
Uh,
that are hard.
I know these are names from ancient history. This is
No
like
one even know who you're talking
when I
about.
was a little kid watching black and white movies on TV with my mother. She'd say some actor, I didn't know who the hell he was.
Yeah,
Oh, he's
exactly.
dead now. Interesting, make a note. But yeah, nobody knows who these people are anymore. Um, hmm.
But Kurt Russell
Who out there
and Clint
today
Eastwood
is
are good
stuff?
ones.
Well, Kurt Russell is the only one that's still alive that I can think of
Well,
right now. Can you?
Clint Eastwood is still alive.
Oh, of course, Clint Eastwood, right?
Yeah,
Naturally, yes. Those
he's
two, and
still.
who else? Oh, wait, I know who it is. He played in, did he play in True Detective or that movie about working at Google where he was a mattress salesman? Who am I thinking of? Is it Vince Vaughn?
Oh yeah, Vince Vaughn. Yeah, yeah.
I think
Vince
I
Vaughn
think
from
he
Chicago. Yeah,
I think he's a libertarian too. It must be
yeah,
very tough for
yeah.
there's you talk about diversity. There's no diversity at all in
No.
in those Hollywood circles, and in fact, almost everywhere among the ruling elite, there's no diversity of thought, just color or
And very
gender.
little diversity of color among the ruling elite. In fact, it's just like they use these culture war as a way to divide everyone else and distract everyone else while they just float above the surface of it, and use it
Yeah,
to stay in power. Like there's not much diversity at the top at all.
yeah, and this is funny, and to go back to a third rail issue, we'll have to talk to Alan and Walter about this. It's that the fact of the matter is that there are about 6 million Jews in the United States. So they're like 2% of the population. Would that be correct? Yes. 6 million would be 2% of the population. Or yes, of course. It's funny, I'm having a brain meld doing simple arithmetic.
Well, I leave
Anyway,
the math to you because I can't do it at all.
so yeah, 6 million is about 2% of 300 million. So, but the fact is that Jews totally dominate the legal profession, accounting, corporate, absolutely dominate the entertainment industry.
Banking.
Yeah, uh, really, the Jews have been really, really successful in dominating
Everything.
uh,
Yeah.
American
They're very,
culture.
they're very enterprising, very intelligent, very productive.
Exactly. Maybe that's kind of you know, are they? Is that a plus of being discriminated against, where only the smart Jews would survive the pogroms, the smart
I
and
don't
rich
know.
ones?
Maybe I know you're not, so I'm going to combine two things you're not supposed to say at the same time. Like maybe the Jews are colonizers.
Well,
We've been colonized.
well, I'm I'm all for Israel. Just
Yeah,
I treat it like any other country there.
well, of
Okay,
course.
I mean,
Yeah. No, I'm saying the Jews are colonizers in the U.S. because they've
oh, in
taken
the
all the
U.S.
best roles. I don't mean in Israel.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about Israel at all. I'm talking about here because here they're all in the major roles are in charge of it. They've risen to the heights of our systems and institutions.
absolutely correct. Because I, but there's another group. Absolutely, it's very interesting looking at the success of Jews. But there's another group that during the Holocaust of World War II were also sought out by the
Mm.
Nazis, and nobody talks about them, and that's the Gypsies,
Mm.
which is incidentally a group that you're not supposed to, I guess, uh, refer to as Gypsies. You're supposed to refer to them now as Roma, which is how they
Mm.
refer to themselves in their own language.
Mm.
And it's a very similar, but in other ways, very different culture from, I don't know, have you ever run across any
In
gypsies?
in France, yes, definitely.
Yeah, well, I've run across them in a number of places. And in Eastern Europe, they're universally despised. The Hungarians call the Romanians gypsies because Hungarians are supposed to hate Romanians, but the Romanians call the Hungarians gypsies, as you know, they despise them so much. But the fact is that the last time I was in Bucharest, you walk down the street and there are all these little urchins, and they grab on to your pants legs, begging, and they won't let go until you throw some money at them. And they're gypsies. And the only way to get rid of them, you can't kick them, or
Kids.
is you have to walk into a store that, like you're going to buy something, and then the shopkeeper will kick them away for you. So this is part of gypsy culture in Eastern Europe. And the funny thing about the gypsies, of course, is they still travel in these horse-drawn vans. It still happens all over Europe, and they strictly, I mean, like Orthodox Jews, actually, to that extent, only mate with each other and associate with each other. And if you're not a gypsy or a Roma, you're an outsider that, you know, is prey. And of course the word gypped, you know, I was gypped.
Really? Oh, ah,
Yeah, it comes from the
wow.
gypsies, because of course the gypsies are notorious as being, you know, petty thieves and, you know, trying to exploit and
Con artists,
pretty,
swindler types. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Fortune tellers, all the fortune tellers, when you have these booths, they're almost all gypsies, frankly,
Hmm.
or Roma, if you wish. But you know, they despise non-gypsies, and non-gypsies, we're not supposed to despise them. Well, look, I don't care, but I could never be accepted in gypsy culture. Nobody that's not a born blood gypsy can be accepted. Back to the matter, you know. So, and they were persecuted by the Nazis. In fact, gypsies are so obvious as being gypsies. Why didn't, how come the Nazis didn't completely wipe them out? Because they're
Hmm.
obvious.
Hmm.
They were a target too of you know, the concentration camps. I'd like to know why.
Well, they're mobile though, you know. They're like they're nomadic, right? Much more. I mean, they move around a lot.
Yeah, I know they're mobile in their wagons and stuff like that, but that's not going to stop. That's not going to stop the SS. In fact, it's going to make you an obvious target to the SS.
That's true. That's true. But as they're moving the Jews into the ghetto, you know, first, the gypsies are probably like, we're getting out of here. You know, we don't want to be in this cordoned off neighborhood.
Yeah, but to go where? To go
Yeah,
where?
that's a good point.
I mean, can't stay on the roads. I mean, I guess you could hide in the forest. Anyway, I'd like to see. I'd like to read an account of exactly what happened to the gypsies during World War II,
Hmm.
because the Nazis were after them just as much as the Jews.
Interesting.
So this is like an unsolved mystery to me. Maybe
Hmm.
somebody's got an answer to
Yeah.
that.
If anyone has any ideas on this, let us know in the comments. The last word in this article, Doug, was avoiding the word locals.
Locals.
Yeah, it's basically,
Yeah.
you know, describing the people obviously at the destination. Instead of using the word residents or citizens, they
Oh,
say it sounds privileged to call them locals.
yeah. Well, I'd say they're locals. That's what they actually are.
Yeah.
And or they're also natives. But of course, when you say natives, you get this the impression that there are people running around in a breechcloth.
Exactly.
Sometimes they do, or the indigenes. I kind of like that one too. Yeah, but they're all referring to the people that are local to that area. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
Hungarians are
descriptive.
local to Hungary, and yeah, this is all crazy. These people are it's part of their methodology to try to put up at the same time as they're reducing the number of words and making the definitions of words hazy. They're trying to put up barriers, and it gives you a sense of cognitive dissonance, where you think that, you know, maybe we really are living in a matrix because this is all so crazy. So I guess Klaus Schwab is right. We're heading for a reset of some type, because this is building up to a like we were talking about yesterday with the truckers strike, which I hope spreads all around the world, incidentally, and more. That we're building up to some type of a real blow up on an intellectual and cultural basis, like we're talking about here, but an economic basis, a political basis. And blow-ups are they're never pleasant, and they're rarely ever convenient for normal people that just want to live normal
No,
lives.
no, it's going to be rough. But I like I'm, you know, the way that reasonable people get persuaded, though, to get pigeonholed in language is that, like both you and I, we don't. Well, I don't want to ever treat anyone who doesn't clearly deserve to be treated with disrespect. I want to treat, if they don't clearly deserve to be disrespected, I want to respect them always,
Yeah,
all the
exactly.
time. It's a default position.
That's the default mode, is to treat people with respect.
Right. And so but that's used against us
Yeah.
in bad faith to try and pigeonhole the language so that we can no longer communicate and with others an accurate understanding of what's objectively true in the world around us. That has nothing to do with judgment of other people or things or anything like that. It's just simply an accurate description, because each word is like a bundle of ideas contained around it. And even if you don't know the literal definition of things, if you can't, maybe recite the actual dictionary definition, when a word passes through your head, you can go, this word I associate with these feelings and these other things. It's like a word is like it's a meme in and of itself. It contains a much larger idea, and having a variety of words that are different and more accurate describing something is critical for humans to be able to, in a complex world, to be able to describe complex things.
Yeah. There's one line out of the Bible that I think it's the Gospel of John. It's where it says, the Word was made flesh. This word is the next step to realizing physical things. You can't destroy words. You're gonna destroy civilization. This is why, I hate going into these words and arguing about what they mean. I mean, some people say, "Oh, you're just being pedantic and you're just looking for trouble." I said, "No, there's an actual anti-cultural movement going on, and if you don't confront it and fight it everywhere, it will conquer." So, yeah, that's why sometimes I may seem pedantic.
Yeah, it's important. It's important. And I mean, over the years I've known you, I would have thought it was when I first heard you talk about words and stop and define them, I thought it was pedantic. Honestly, I really did. And then, but I just didn't understand what was actually happening with the language. I didn't understand how it was actually. It was like cutting off one arm. I mean, it so limits your ability to communicate effectively with others, and even then to understand what's happening. Because if you don't have a word for something, as you said earlier, you can't even process the thoughts around it. I mean, that the words matter; they're very important. So,
Yeah, it's very much like primitive people who can't count. They say 2, 3, many.
right, it's
That
true,
was a
but it's not very
catchphrase during the
accurate.
Vietnam War, incidentally, when they were talking about 2, 3, many Vietnams. Because primitive people don't count past 3. It's kind of academic to them. Although nothing's academic to them. That's funny. It's a contradiction. It's academic to them, but nothing's academic because they don't have an academy for. Anyway, it's insane. We're on the lead at this point. The great sweep of history, I'm afraid, is running against us. We are like salmon swimming against the current. At least that's the way I see it. But
Yep, but it's at least our nature to fight against that current or swim against the current anyway. So we're gonna do it no matter what. We'll see what
yeah, I don't
happens.
want to roll over on my back like a whipped dog. I'd rather, bite a few with the ankle anyway.
Exactly. All right, we'll leave it there, Doug. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Matt, thank you.